Hey guys, welcome back to our second episode of Keep Watch. I'm so excited to keep going on this journey with you. And before we get started, I just want to say that I'm new to this whole YouTube thing, and as I get better at it, I just hope you guys are patient with me as I get more consistent with my editing, more consistent with my content, and just my videos, really. And please subscribe, share this far and wide, as we want to spread the word about what's going on in the world today and how it relates to us. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. So last episode we went through and we decided that we're going to stick with the historicist view of prophecy. So today we're going to have a look at some things that are going on in the world and we're going to try and make sense of them. And the next week we're going to tie it all together. So we're going to come with a biblical view and then kind of like what's happening in the world and then tie it together and see what we arrive at. So to understand what is happening in the world today, we need to go back. And of course I'm talking about COVID. That's kind of the main thing that's happening in the world today. It kind of made our whole world go crazy. So let's just go back to where it all began. And no, I'm not actually even talking about COVID. We need to go way back. And to be honest, a lot of groundwork for COVID restrictions and rules actually do go way back. They didn't just come up into play in 2020. It was way before that, much before that. And we're not going to go too much into it today, but we will in the coming weeks, so get ready for that. However, we're going to need to address something going back to 2001 to make the first important point that we need to address. And I know way back is actually 2001 for me because I was only 11 months old. I don't remember it, so I had to do some Googling about it because I don't know what the world was like in 2001. Forgive my Gen Z-ness. What we're going to be talking about is how governments cause problems, then use those caused problems to pass laws and legislations that would be illegal to pass otherwise. That's really convoluted, but basically it's the idea that the government will cause a problem to benefit from that problem. And yes, we're talking about 9/11. And no, we're not going to be covering the conspiracies of it all. Hey guys, I'm just editing this video right now and I realized that I forgot to respond to that little thing there with Bush and 9/11 and is it controlled? Was it an inside job? Was it done by terrorists? Who knows, man? Who really knows? Well, I have good news for you because we're going to be discussing this topic in the weeks to come. So make sure that you keep subscribed and keep watching our videos, but let's get right back into it. But the reason we aren't is because the point I'm trying to get across is irrespective of the good old question, who done it? It's the fact that governments actually take opportunities to pass laws and legislations that they wouldn't actually be able to pass without catastrophe. So before we talk about 9/11, I just really want to send my condolences, my love, and my utmost respect to those who suffered or served during this tragedy. So, continuing on. Before 9/11, the world was really different. And being the Gen Z that I am, I had to Google it because I don't remember what the world was like. Sue me. So before 9/11, people didn't have to have a ticket to wander around the airport or wait at a gate. No one checked passengers' IDs before boarding the plane, and the only item people had to remove when passing through security was loose change. You know how annoying it is every time you go through the plane security? Even domestic flights in Australia, you need to take out all your pockets, you need to take out all your jolly earphones, your laptop out of your bag. Actually, I think they stopped doing that one. But it's so annoying. Imagine a day where you could fly anywhere and don't worry about that, just loose change. That sounds great. Also, checked baggage was never scanned. Can you imagine that? Never. This is just one example of what changed after 9/11 in America and the world, I guess, but the increase of government surveillance is another thing. So this leads us to the main thing that happened, and that is highly controversial to this day. The US Patriot Act was signed by George W. Bush, and he's the one that actually passed it. So it was passed in a direct response to 9/11, and it was aimed at stopping terrorism and terror attacks from ever happening again in the United States. Basically what it would do is increase the surveillance of the American citizens so that they could actually be ahead of the curve in terms of terrorism threat, because they could actually monitor what's happening in society and then they could squash any kind of little threat that came up from the citizens, right? That was the idea of it. It sounds kind of creepy even just from that perspective, even though it is like, you could argue that it has a good intention. It's still kind of like, you're gonna read everything of my emails just so that you know if I'm not a terrorist.
yeah, it kind of makes you into a suspect even though you're not. Yeah, that's kind of part of it. But it was passed, and good old Eric Snowden in 2013, who was a former NSA employee, not employer, basically exposed the fact that Obama and Bush were using Section 215 of the Patriot Act to acquire phone data of American citizens in bulk. They weren't just doing it in small occasions where they thought they were terrorist threats. They were just doing it with everyone. That's kind of creepy. So these records include the phone numbers dialed and received, the dates of times of those calls, and the duration. That program was ruled unlawful by an appeal court in May 2015. So the fact that it's quite interesting here is the fact that under emergency situations they passed this law. It's been found to actually go beyond what it was meant to do, impedes on people's freedoms, and the own courts of America deem that it's unlawful. So in other words, an unlawful act is passed at a time where people want unlawful things for safety. And that's an idea that we're going to be getting in just a little bit later on in the video. But I just want to preface that point, is that it may seem good at the time, but later on, it isn't. When circumstances change, should that really dictate what is right and wrong? But basically, to better understand the US government and what they did with this act, I have a little quote from aclu.org. Well, it's not that little. That basically states, under Section 215, the government can also collect information about what books you read, what you say, what you study, your purchases, your medical history, your personal finances. The provision gives law enforcement broad access to these records without probable cause of a crime. So literally, it's like they may not even suspect that you're a terrorist, and they can literally just know what you read, know what you study, everything about you. It also prohibits the holders of this information, like librarians, from disclosing that they have been ordered to turn over such records. So if the government wants to know what you've been reading, and they go to a library to figure that out, this actually stops the librarian from telling other people that the government asked them to do this search on one person and tell them, basically rat them out. That's crazy, right? I hope you think that's crazy. So basically, instead of using this legislation for the legitimate purpose of fighting terrorism, I mean, it's arguably pretty questionable in the first place. Mass surveillance by the government on one's own population, like that don't sign me up for that. That doesn't sound good. The Bush and Obama government were using it to spy on their own citizens in a way that literally sounds like it's out of the book of 1984. The idea of spying on citizens and basically turning them into subjects of the government on its own, no one would be for that. No one would willingly sign up and say, yes, government, know everything about me, know what I read, know my thoughts, know my feelings and my love for you. No one would want that, right? However, when you add a little bit of terrorism and a threat in there, people start to freak out. And when people are scared, they'll do anything to get their safety back, even if it means giving up their freedom. And this is exactly an example of that. And this basically shows that governments do use opportunities to invoke fear into the masses so they can pass legislation that increases their power. If we're lucky, they'll actually revoke their Emergency Act powers, which in this case, we're kind of, like, Americans are kind of lucky that they actually revoked it to some degree. And literally, it doesn't matter. Like, at this point in my argument, it does not matter what they're doing it for, because you have the evidence there that they did it, right? And obviously, it has to be for something, but right now, we have the evidence that they actually did take the opportunity of 9/11, which is kind of gross to me, because you have, how many people died in 9/11? Basically, almost 3,000 people died in 9/11. 2,996 people died in 9/11, American citizens. And their own government says, you know what, we're going to use this opportunity to spy on you. Yeah, that's government's not good, guys. And as a Christian, I feel like we should especially be kind of worried about these things when we know in the end times where this is going to lead. We know where this is going to go, and we can kind of see prophetically what's going to come out of this. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as we talk about our next example. But I really want that to be clear in your mind, is the fact that governments will take any opportunity they have to better control their subjects, which is us. And again, you may be thinking, why? What did they do? Why did they do that? But again, there's the evidence for it. And I'm not going to be getting into what it leads for today because we're going to leave that for next video. Yeah, I'm really teasing that one. Let's move on. So basically, fast forwarding to our current example. And again, I want to make this point so clear. If one thing history teaches us is that government want power, and when we give it to them, they don't want to let it go. Enter March 2020. A mysterious coronavirus seems to be taking the world by storm. People in Wuhan, China are sick and they're losing their lives every day. Then it makes its way to the West and eventually it comes to Australia. Fast forward to 2021 and look at what we've become in Australia. To cops tackling and arresting a 12-year-old girl in a shopping mall for not wearing a mask. To innocent dogs being shot because of, Rona. I'm not going to be getting into the details of where this virus is from and what it is and why and all this kind of stuff today. But what we are going to be getting into is that just like in 9/11's case, our government, boy oh boy, does it like power. And when it gets it, it's not going to want to let it up. And from a prophetic perspective, we're going to be having a look at it next week. But in case you kind of already have an inkling, we know where this is going. We're going to be focusing on the state of Victoria. I was born and raised in Victoria. I spent like half all my life there. And a very big part of me is still down there. So like, my heart is with you guys there that are suffering. I'm coming from and talking to you guys from, the state of freedom, New South Wales. Well, not anymore really, but we've had it a lot easier than you guys, and my condolences and respects are with you guys because I can't imagine how hard it is to be in your 6th lockdown right now. So, respect to you guys. My lovely hometown of Melbourne, you guys are in your 6th lockdown, and no end in sight. One might wonder, how did we even get here? When COVID-19 came to Victoria, the game plan was just to flatten the curve. I think you all remember that. 2 weeks lockdown. This is all justified by the looming threat of COVID-19. It was a time when not much conclusive evidence was on the scene. A lot of videos were emerging out of Wuhan, China, and to be quite frank, it was really hard to know what to even believe. We saw people dropping dead and citizens being locked inside their own apartments, unable to get supplies and resources. No one knew what to believe, except that what was happening in China, we did not want happening in the West. We did not want that happening here. So 2-week lockdown seemed justified to the population, and a lot of people were on board. I actually remember myself thinking in the early stages, like, oh, this thing looks really deadly. We should probably do whatever we can to get rid of it. However, my opinion changed as you'll see why. It seemed like a worthy experiment. However, 2 weeks turned into 1 month, which saw tougher and tougher restrictions from stage 2 to stage 3, and so on. As the Victorian government's restrictions grew tougher and tougher, so did the divide between those who went along with all of that and those who saw that the government was kind of overstepping their bounds of authority. And today was so polarized and was so separate. And it grows even worse as evidence is actually coming out regarding the severity of COVID and kind of questioning its deadliness, and also lots of papers are being published supporting early interventions such as drug cocktails to prevent hospitalization. Censorship continues to grow. Despite all that evidence coming out, despite all the other side fighting back and actually showing evidence and laws and scientific papers, journal studies and all that, censorship just continues to grow. Censorship of alternative views of the government become more and more extreme. From Google and YouTube banning videos that contradict the official narrative, to Daniel Andrews banning my boy Avi Yemeni from entering a press conference. This process was a slow one, and if they did this overnight, it would not work. People would wake up and they'd see, this cannot happen, our freedoms are being taken away. However, it's a really, really slow one, and I'm willing to bet that if we ask people today if they know what's going on, a lot of people will say no, and even if they do, I don't think a lot of them will care. And this is only because slowly, as coronavirus information became more mainstream and the government was pushing one certain narrative, they did everything they can very slowly to weed out all the other side, and they're saying, oh no, we have experts that say against that, we have experts that prove that wrong, this has been fact checked and all this kind of stuff, until you have a point where there's this one unified global narrative that is on everywhere, and if you go against it, you're censored. And to be honest, I'm not too sure what the future of the show will be, because I don't plan on censoring my opinions. I'm not saying that I'm here to offend anyone, but it's just, we have to look at all the evidence, and whether they want to censor that from us, that's up to them. But I believe that we have the right for information, we have the right to actually access that, and I don't know, we'll see what happens, but I'm definitely not going to shut my mouth, so I will be fighting for all of us. Now, the blatant curtailing of our freedoms, such as freedom of press, freedom of movement, and whatever else the government is taking from us, would not have been able to happen if it wasn't for COVID-19. And I know you guys in Victoria are pretty aware of what's going on. You know the protests, you know how people are angry because our government is just taking everything that it can from us. And to be honest, this would not be able to happen if it wasn't for COVID-19. State of emergency power was given to Daniel Andrews and all the premiers of Australia, and they don't want to give it up. I was actually looking at the timeline, and every time it came up for ending the state of emergency powers, guess what? It's renewed. It's renewed. We have more cases. We're going to renew it. And I'm not saying that coronavirus is not deadly, but what I'm saying is that they definitely don't want to give up their power. And with the added censoring the press, and with the added censoring everything else, you have to see that there's something else going on here, and next week we're going to really get into it. In my opinion, the government is too crafty to simply act totalitarian, and they're not going to just start taking away freedom with no reason for their own gain. No. They're much more subtle than that, and they use catastrophes, as I've previously mentioned, like 9/11, to pass things like US Patriot Act that literally spies on the citizens of America. They use those types of things like they are today. And the funny thing about COVID-19 is that they actually make us run to them, begging them that our rights be taken away in order for them to actually protect us. It's actually so genius. It's like you create a disaster, then you make the masses demand that we actually be controlled in order to get our safety. Even if coronavirus is really deadly, you have to seriously ask yourself if this is worth it, because when the government gets drunk on power and doesn't want to give up their power, it'll be too late. You may be thinking, but what reason do they have to do this? Why would they? What is all this working towards? Again, I'm going to have to tease that next video that's coming out next week, or the week after. Just keep watching, and you'll see what I'm going to be working towards. And I know we didn't get into the word today, but there was some context we had to lay today before we jump into the passages for next week. And I hope I made my point clear today, but I'm just going to summarize everything. Basically, the one thing I want you guys to take away from this video is the fact that governments are not for us. Governments and every other... There's so many examples that I could have picked to actually show this, and if I could go through all the examples where governments have used self-induced catastrophes to actually benefit from it. And it's happened in so many revolutions. The list would be so long and this video would be going on forever. But I chose 9/11 because, September's coming around. But also because it's so clear, and it's in our today's society, so clear that even if in an American free society can do something like the Patriot Act, imagine what Australia is doing to us today. And especially as a Christian in today's society, I think we need to be a bit more open-minded and a bit more with our eyes watching this kind of stuff, because slowly, all our freedoms are going to be gone. It's like this frog in the water, You put it in the water, and then you put it on the stove, and very slowly it gets warmer and warmer and warmer. But the frog doesn't know what's coming, right? So he stays in there until eventually it's too late and it's hot, and then he dies. He's boiling and he dies. But imagine if you had a frog and you try to put him in boiling water, as soon as he'd jump out, right? I'm probably not explaining this very well, but you guys get this, what I'm trying to say. Over time we become corrupted, and over time they start to play with our ideas. And we're the point where the mainstream media is like playing one narrative, it's so hard to not be in mass psychosis. But this video is all about the idea that governments will take any chance they get to actually squash our freedom. And from a biblical perspective, that should kind of make us think where we're going to be going with this. And next week we're going to get into it more. And I also kind of want to bring this out of the lens of conspiracy. It's like, I wanted to make this video to show that it's not a conspiracy to say that the government is using this to actually take away our freedom. And I want to make that point clear, because it's really important to understand, because once you understand that the government's not on your side but actually kind of against you, everything else seems to fit in place, and you kind of wake up from the lie that the government has your best interests at hand when they really don't. We need to trust in God in these end times and not trust in the government and what they're telling us. And we also have to have an open mind and look at sources from all areas and not just come to conclusions based on what Channel 9, Channel 7 say to us. And I'm not saying to swing so far to the other side, but I'm saying we need balance in this approach. We need to think about it logically. If laws were passed in the past, if laws passed today are not justifiable in the past, should we even pass them at all? And what I mean by that is, under any circumstance, if limiting freedom of speech and press is okay because of our safety, should we allow that? That would not be okay last year. 2 years ago. But just because of coronavirus, we allow the government to dictate what we speak. But just because of a coronavirus, we allow the government to dictate what we speak. And it's kind of to the point where we have to wake up and realize that literally in Victoria, you can go to a brothel, but are gyms open? No. Churches were closed when brothels were open. It's not really... And this is the point I want to make. Even though there may be a deadly pandemic going on, how does that make any logic? How does that make any sense when brothels are open but places of worship and exercise are closed? And gyms are like one of the most safest places in my opinion. And I get it, people are sweating and using equipment, but to be quite honest, in a lot of gyms, you clean equipment anyway. You use a towel, you have contact check-in because you have a tag, and you're made to sanitize everything that you use. And yet they close that, but then, it's a bit... And that's the point I want to try and make, is that the government doesn't actually care about us, and they don't operate from a place of logic. They have different agendas, they have bigger agendas going on. And I hope from this video that is clear, and next week we're going to be getting into it. And I know this episode and this video is really short, but I needed to preface this before we move on to next week, because otherwise it would just be too much information. So make sure to subscribe to our channel and give us a like, share it far and wide. Till next time guys, keep watch, and let me know what you guys think of this video. Comment below, text me on Instagram, let's have a conversation. I really want to see what you guys reckon.